Here we are.
Welcome.
Thank you. Wait, are you talking to our guests?
No, I don't know.
Our listeners?
I don't know who we're talking to. We're talking to somebody, right?
Yeah.
But we're back. We're
We're
here.
back. We're back.
We didn't really go anywhere, I guess.
Well, it feels like we did because between last week and this week, we have like a 30-degree temperature change.
Summer was
Summer-
officially canceled.
Yeah, summer's canceled along with the rest of 2020.
I mean, it's right in line with cancel culture. So summer's canceled.
It's true.
Summer's canceled.
Canceled.
I almost had the Rona,
Mm-hmm.
and you did some drills down
I
at
did
military
some-
base here in Washington,
Yep, I did some National Guards drills.
preparing for. Well, actually, just kind of staying up on your,
Well, just a regular
Skills.
drill. And then it was kind of a weekend of staying on your toes. Because we get there and they're like, hey, surprise, we're going to drill in December and it's going to be a week long and cancel all your plans because we're expecting civil unrest in Seattle. And
some more canceling.
We're going to support that.
More cancel culture.
Yep.
Man. Wow.
Yep. So they're activating the guard, at least in our state, to stand by for the...
For the impending implosion.
yeah, something like that. So that should be interesting. But
So
it's been
we
a
should
long- it's been a long
talk
weekend.
about all those things.
All those things.
But before we do,
Yep.
we should probably light our cigars and get into this whiskey. What do you think?
Well, you heady. I'm going to start another cigar. I started early.
That's right. You got into this. All right,
Right,
let's
here we go.
roll.
We are the Old Fashioned Dad Podcast, looking to love dads through the person and work of Jesus Christ, entering into tough conversations on marriage, parenting, sex, religion, all while having a good whiskey.
Well, we are smoking on some courtesy of Christian here. The other Christian, a Thompson cigar.
Thompson.
Yeah. You know what? I really like the punch method.
I'm a fan.
Yeah.
I like it.
I've tried a lot of as the Honest Cigar experience is shared, the different methods, but I think I'm a punch fan.
Yep.
Yeah, I really like that. Also, those guys, they got back to me and they answered our question.
Did they?
Yeah.
Which what was their answer? The question was.
I think it's going to come out in this.
Okay.
Whenever they release. So in the next
Gosh,
episode.
it should be like episode 11 or 12. something
Yeah.
like
So
that.
they answer our question and then they ask us a question.
Okay.
So we gotta listen to it.
I gotta start listening to their episodes now. Just kidding, Chad and Tyler. That's their names, right?
Yeah,
Okay,
and
good.
Tyler. Yeah, I actually got to. It's always so funny. Is like you get to hear their voices and stuff like that, but you don't like see the pictures as much.
Right.
And so I finally saw a picture of both Chad and Tyler, and they are rocking some like nice like long hair and some
Yeah.
long beards, and like they got gray through it. I'm just like I'm a little jealous.
I know. Me too. I was like, oh, I feel like a baby. I had to shave for drill, so like this is the first time in 2 months I've had a clean shaven face. And
Does your face feel naked?
Feels cold.
Feels naked,
Feels
doesn't it?
naked. Yeah.
Yeah. So I didn't die from the Rona.
Good.
Not to make too much light of that. I know that that's serious for everybody, but there was like a decent possibility that I had it because somebody at my gym got tested positive for
For the Rona.
the Rona.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what we're calling it on the streets.
Yeah. It's
The
a
Rona.
street slang. It's like a street drug.
It might, I was in favor of calling it the vid, for COVID, but
The vid.
it just didn't really stick.
Yeah, sounds a little
So-
too STD-like. I don't know.
Yeah, we don't want that. We don't want any of the vid. Well, we had today might be a short episode. I don't know, but we had, a couple of topics. At least I was tossing around, and I know that both of us have been busy. You're doing drill, and I'm going through a home remodel. Well, not a home kitchen remodel, which kind of sucks to live in construction land.
Yep.
But one of the topics that I was thinking about was dealing with hurt and forgiveness, which I think is a good topic. But maybe that's for another time. But I think the topic that could be kind of interesting to talk about today is fighting with your wife.
Why would you want to talk about that?
Oh, I don't know. I never actually fight with my wife.
I know. It's because you're like a real life Instagram model where everything is actually perfect.
Yeah,
Just picture
that's
perfect.
right. Everything's heavily curated.
Yep.
All my conversation and thoughts, I always anticipate all of her needs.
Yeah.
I always say the right thing.
Everything glorifies God and lifts her up.
Exactly.
Encourages her, yeah.
I shop at Crate and Barrel for her. without her even asking.
Wow.
You know,
Look
so
at you,
I
man.
mean,
It's good.
I'm pretty much
You're the man.
perfect husband.
Yeah, perfect husband.
I never get into fights with my
Yeah,
wife,
yeah.
ever. And you don't either, right?
Well, I do.
You do?
We actually had to reschedule our podcast recording because we were supposed to do it yesterday, and I had to kind of embarrassingly be like, things with my wife and I aren't going so great today. We need to work this out, so let's push this till tomorrow. And you know, I was kind of reflecting on that, and it was really good for me because my heart was not in a good place most of yesterday. I was just kind of pissed off, and I'm like,
You too? I was pissed off,
Yeah.
but at my kids.
yeah, for your kids. I was just kind of pissed off because we had a fight in the morning, you know, and my heart just wasn't in a good place, and so with, you know, kind of a half-assed effort, I'm like, you know, via text, like, dude, let's reschedule this, and can you pray for me? and you did via text, which, I mean, it's still prayer, you know, and it's still, God still used it, you know, and a little cheesy or whatever, but I took that moment to just be like, okay, you know, God, pray in my heart to talk to my wife, to love her, to be humble, to admit where I was wrong and proud and whatnot, and it was good. We had a good productive conversation after that and worked
Nice.
things out. But yeah, I mean, I think just with that being so fresh, I mean, it's the only time we've ever fought in our 14 years, but you know.
Yeah, that's amazing. What a track record.
But you know, I think it'd be a good topic to discuss, you know, because I mean, I think the world has this idea that like a man and woman are compatible when they don't fight. We always get along. We don't fight. It's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really think that's a good metric. But I think rather it's how you fight, how you disagree, not necessarily fight, because it's like fight insinuates like a yelling back and forth.
Sure.
So I don't know. What are your, before I, you know, put my laundry out there and how terrible of a husband I am.
Your lingerie out there?
Yeah, my lingerie.
What do I think?
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the topic of how husbands and wives should, in a God glorifying way, deal with conflict?
Well, I'm glad you asked. You know, we're going through a stressful time with, like I said before, and I don't want to complain about it, and it sounds like I am, but with a remodel, and so there's like lots of opportunities to fight. You know, lots of opportunities for stress and whatnot, and so this idea, I don't know, it came to me about a year ago. I was like, man, what does it look like to fight well with my wife? And I kind of wanted to frame it that way because, like, fighting's inevitable. You know, like, you're right. The health of a marriage should not, the metric should not be how frequently you fight or don't fight.
Right. Shouldn't be a lack of conflict. We're going to have conflict.
Yeah. I mean, people can be completely pleasant to one another and still hate each other, and we call that passive
Sure. Or
aggression.
still be sinning in their people pleasing or abdicating
Exactly.
or whatever, you know.
Exactly.
Yep.
So I think, you know, there's a way, you know, and yeah, I mean, I think when you say the word fighting, you're right. I think it kind of paints a picture as opposed to, say, disagreement, you know. But I think there's a way to where you can, I think, fight well, disagree well in your marriage when it comes to particular issues. But if I was to stop and take fighting in general, most of my fighting with my wife, or most of my disagreeing with my wife, often comes down to me believing something about her that's actually not true. You know, I'll have an image in my head of, like, my wife said this about me that, you know, and oftentimes it's like my level of provision. Like, that's usually what it's implicating, you know, but I will believe that. And rather than try and clarify with her what she means by her comments or statements, or I'll just interpret the body language. I'll just, you know, and stupidly have these conversations over text message. What an idiot I am. Never do that.
Yeah, don't
ever do that.
Don't deal with conflict over text.
No.
Or social media.
No, you're just ensuring that you're going to have to deal with conflict longer.
Right.
So
You have more to unwrap and
Oh my gosh.
clear up, yeah.
yeah, so I think dealing with this topic is important for husbands and dads because I mean, you fight with your wife, argue with her, disagree with her, that's going to impact your parenting.
Sure. Your kids are inevitably going to, overhear it or maybe be in the room or...
Yeah, I mean, I meet a lot of parents right now. Well, before the pandemic, I was meeting with a lot of parents who are like, we don't argue in front of our kids. We don't want to scar them. And so we go out of the room. And I think, okay, yeah, okay.
I think that's a stupid idea. I'm just going to stake my flag in the ground here. That's dumb.
Yeah.
I don't know what your professional advice to them is.
I say like, okay, like, I understand that you don't want to scar them because you might be like ramped up and you're yelling at your spouse, but do your kids get to see you reconcile? And I think that's the key moment for me in my own marital interactions. Is like I want my kids to see me like asking my wife for forgiveness. I want my kids to see me forgiving my wife. I want my kids to see me like hugging and praying for her. Right. And those are things that oftentimes happen after an argument. And because I want them to understand reconciliation, which I think is absent from a lot of marriages that simply just don't have Christ. Well, I mean, there are marriages that have Christ that also seem to lack reconciliation, but the point of Christianity is like being reconciled to God, and so we take that into our marriage, and like, so I want my kids being able to see. So I don't invite my kids like, hey, I'm about to have an argument with my wife, with mommy. Yeah. Come on over and pull up a chair and watch. Yeah. I don't invite them to do that, but I'm also not at the same time like when an argument is happening, I'm not looking to crush my wife in front of my kids.
Sure.
I'm very mindful of that because that doesn't do anything.
Yeah. Well, it does. It crushes her hopes and their spirit,
and that
kids
would
learn to disrespect their mom.
And that does scar. That does scar. Kids are like, oh man, I'm 40 years old. I remember growing up in a household where my dad would just crush my mom with his words. Yeah. And so I get parents on that end, like they don't want to do that. Which is fine if you want to go in the back bedroom and talk about it, but make sure that you're coming back and you're reconciling in the open.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'd say there's kind of a time and a place. It depends on what the nature of the discussion or argument is, I think it's good and healthy for you to be transparent in front of your kids because I think that the danger is that there's kind of this assumption, or I've observed with, myself or whatever I've gleaned from, the parents before me, when I was a kid, is kids tend to think their parents can do no wrong, right? They're all powerful.
Yeah.
That they're subconsciously modeling.
I don't do anything wrong, just so you know, as a parent.
Of course not. I'm talking about other parents.
Oh, right.
But I mean, if you're a Christian, you should be modeling for your kids not perfection, because the Bible isn't a bunch of good guys that we need to model our lives after. It's a bunch of screwed up guys who messed up and need Jesus. Mm-hmm. Except for Jesus, who needs nothing but God. Right. Because I mean the real parallel there, is that Jesus was the most needy and dependent man who's ever lived, and he's solely dependent on God. Yeah. And that's our model, not being moral and good on the surface. Right. And so I think it's healthy that our kids see us, not sin per se, but like see the rawness of life. Like sometimes we lose our cool. Sometimes we yell. Sometimes we say things that are hurtful and mean. And while I'm not saying that's a good thing per se, but they also need to see the side of like, sit down with them and be like, hey, today, mommy and daddy, I guess you won't talk that way if your kids are like 16, but in my situation, mom and dad, had an argument and I sinned against her and God by saying these things that were hurtful because I felt attacked, and we both need Jesus, and we repented, and we're good now. We're solid. God's back on the throne. I was trying to replace him with, feeling like my will was being thwarted, and obviously I'm not using those words because that's kind of confusing, but But I mean, so much of the conflict is around that, is like feeling like, you're making assumptions, or you feel attacked,
Right.
or
Right.
like your expectations are being stifled or not met, and they tend to blow up there. And so I'm always trying to model that to my kid, like, and it's essential, and it's only really as Christians that we can do this and have a humility based in God and that reconciliation back to God. We're going to sin. If we're teaching our kids, like, your heart is wicked and my heart's wicked, we all need God and he transforms us, but all they see is us trying to pretend like we're not sinful and our shit doesn't stink. Well, where's the gospel in that? Like, where's our need for repentance if they never see that, or we're trying to shelter them from it,
You're absolutely right, and I think we miss out on a good teaching opportunity with our kids when if we don't reconcile with our wife in front of them, and just in general, people tend to learn better through a very tangible example, and so you have this moment where, like, us as husbands might be like vehemently disagreeing with our wives, and our kids can hear that, our kids can see that, and they hear the intense discussion. They may not understand all that's being said or the context of stuff,
right.
But what they do understand is body language. Like, they may not know how to describe that, but they'll understand the body language. Like, daddy, appears aggressive.
Right.
Mommy appears defensive. Again, they can't put those words
they
necessarily.
both appear closed off and not humble.
But they understand how to describe a hug.
Sure.
And they understand how to describe prayer, and they understand how to describe kiss and affection.
Yeah.
And so, and that's the stuff that kids are going to look at. It's like, yeah, mom and dad argued. Mom and dad argued, but they made up. They made up. And again, they may not be able to attach theological components to that yet,
mm-hmm.
but if we're teaching them in those moments, recognizing in those moments these instances,
right.
we are building a foundation for our kids to understand the gospel better.
Yeah.
And I think that's, as much as I hate that this is how my kids can learn reconciliation is through my own failures as a husband.
Sure. That's...
I'm like, okay, God still redeems things.
Sure.
Like, so he takes my failures and, like, my insecurities as a husband, and he allows them to be teaching moments for my kids, and there's redemption there for myself, because I then get to teach my kids in my own failure and humility and go, hey, let's point back to Christ.
Right.
And then there's reconciliation.
Right. Well, and when we're in Christ, we're not trying to save face. Like, that's not... I think that's kind of humanity's default of, like, trying to save face, trying to have save their reputation, and so they're willing to lie, cheat, deceive, or whatever to, like, keep appearances up, right?
Yeah.
But as Christians, like, we don't have to have those insecurities, because we know that we are all equally needing Jesus, and so I mean that's so we're kind of talking about the aspect of, like, whether or not we argue in front of our kids and making sure they see us reconcile and know that we're good, so that, like, they're not insecure about, like, are mom and dad okay, like,
right.
But then there's also the how do you fight, how do you deal with conflict between spouses in a way that's glorifying to God, because I mean, by God's grace, hopefully my arguments with my wife 14 years into our marriage are shorter,
different,
less mean, and I don't know, I guess more mature and productive than they were when we first got married.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, maybe we talk a little bit about kind of what like a healthy fight or argument would look like. I mean, I obviously I got a little bit of a temper, and I can tell, like, when I'm in an argument, if I'm fighting for, like, what's good and holy, and when I'm just, like, butt hurt and my pride's wounded, and I'm fighting about that, when I'm being petty or stupid,
Well, I know for me that there's kind of an anatomy, if you will, of a healthy argument or a disagreement and an unhealthy disagreement, and I think you kind of touched on it a little bit with what you just said about your pride's hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, like, if I'm seeking to understand my wife and her, let's say, complaint against me, or she's calling something out, rightfully so, and if my heart is like, yeah, wow, okay, I should probably listen to this, and I should seek to understand what she means by that, and if I need to, I should ask for forgiveness. If my heart is like there, I would say then that's generally trending on the healthy side.
Sure.
Unfortunately, that's not all. I would say that's not the common occurrence. You know, my heart is like, you know, if she calls me out on something, it's, well, let me point out something you did.
Sure. It's kind of the tit for tat. You know?
Yeah, like, well, let me tell you why I did that. It's because you did this.
Sure. You justify based on some perceived wrong.
Maybe if you were meeting my needs a little better.
Sure.
Maybe if you were anticipating things a little more. Maybe if you understood the stresses that are in my life. Maybe if you took a moment to acknowledge how much I do for the family, we wouldn't be having this conversation.
Sounds like you need to have a conversation with your wife. got some wounds there.
I know, right? Did you see how that was just kind of coming out? You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
But I know that when I'm there, and it kind of feels like, you know, when I get in that mode, it's an avalanche. It doesn't stop.
Sure. Yeah. Just got all.
We're gonna see this avalanche all the way through until everything's completely covered.
Right. All those things you're holding on to just come out in not a very productive way. Yeah.
And so I definitely know, and I think it's been God's grace over the course of 13 years of marriage, that he's like, this is the marks of an unhealthy disagreement. And so now, like, I can get into it, and I can start going down the path of an unhealthy disagreement with my wife, and recognize, oh shoot, I'm doing this. I need to stop.
Sure.
And or she can point out, like, hey, you're doing this, because we've had preemptive conversation now about each other's proclivities.
Sure. So where you like give permission, like if I'm doing this
exactly.
thing that I know that I tend to do, here's a productive way to call it out.
And and now she can do that, and I'm like, dang it, I wish I hadn't told you that, you know. But it tends to go much better nowadays. You know, there's very few, and this is not tooting my own horn. I think it's just simply like, I really want to love my wife, and I don't want to destroy her in my conversation with her. I don't want to be right.
Sure.
As Mark Driscoll, I think, once said, if you fight with your wife and you win, you lose.
Yeah.
I'm like, yep.
I mean, both. Just you've got to live with, you know, that, practically speaking, but also biblically, like, you're one flesh, like you're attacking yourself.
Right.
Like if if that relationship's not healthy, or if there's things that are undealt with, like the wounds are going to fester.
Right. So I mean, I think that's an example for me, in terms of, I don't know, kind of an anatomy. I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, but the breakdown of unhealthy versus healthy.
Sure.
But I don't know. What about for you?
I mean, sorry, specifically, what's the question?
I mean, you were talking about, like, how to fight well with disagree, that sort of stuff.
I mean, for me, it's a matter of keeping my cool and being able to, like, go back to, like, what's, like, trying to resist those urges of, like, I feel wounded and I'm going to try to wound her back, you know, just kind of like that sophomore.
Very adversarial.
Yeah. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I mean, my tendency, and maybe this is like guys in general, is to kind of shut down. You know, just
go
be
quiet.
like, oh, yeah, go quiet, you know, withdrawal. And typically for me, that's like withdrawal into my work or other busyness, you know, just like, because it's easiest for us guys just to be like, okay, well, that sucks. I'm going to go to this other part of my life and just compartmentalize, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, what would you say, either experientially or professionally, that if guys, if listeners, you know, like know that that's kind of their tendency is to withdraw or shut down, whether it's to avoid conflict or just to be like, oh yeah, like you think that's bad, wait till I just like don't contribute at all, you know, or whatever, you know, whatever kind of their mindset is at the moment. I mean, how do we combat that? I mean, other than the obvious of like prayer and humility, which.
Well, so I mean, this is the piece that's difficult. Is like, if you don't have measures already set up in your life to I guess like fail-safes. Fail-safe measures already set up in your life.
Like backstops.
Yeah, like
If I get to this place.
Yeah, I mean, you're military, so like, how many
military.
like fail-safe measures do you have to have for plans and contingencies upon contingencies?
Sure.
Tons.
Yep.
So
You got most likely course of action, the most dangerous course of action.
I mean, you got all kinds of metrics from like least to most restrictive, all that sort of stuff on whatnot. So, if you're not preemptive in your life as a husband, like recognizing your own proclivities, meaning like, how do you function? Do you wrestle with insecurity? Do you know what those insecurities are? Do you know how you project them? Do you understand how they influence you? And then do you have groupings of like other husbands that are maybe not exactly at that same stage you are? Maybe they're a little further down the road in your life. Do you have a group of guys that like you can be honest with? Okay. Do you have regular conversation with your wife? And that might be hard to do, especially if you're in the beginning stages of figuring out how to fight well with your wife. But do you have that sort of stuff already preemptively done, so that when you reach these boiling points, you've got stuff that you can implement, say before you boil over.
Sure.
But if you don't have this sort of stuff in place, it's like, well, I guess you're just going to keep boiling over and doing the same thing. So you kind of have to do the work before the crisis hits.
Sure. So it kind of sounds like you're saying you need to make sure you're grounded in God's word, so you can recognize truth in your sin.
Boom.
You've got to have accountability.
Boom.
Which has always been a struggle for me. I mean, I don't know. I mean, our friendship's obviously grown through this podcast, and so like you become like my go-to guy. You
yes. I love it. And likewise.
And there's a third one because I like things in threes. Trying to kind of boil down what you're saying. I mean, in being self-aware, essentially, like knowing
that's a big
where
one.
you tend to boil over, what your weaknesses are, the assumptions you tend to make when you feel attacked.
How much are you engaging in personal reflection?
Yes.
You know, if you're doing no personal reflection, and that can come through, like that's not something that you necessarily have to set aside and do separately.
Right.
Like say from being in God's word, like there's a lot of personal reflection that happens by being in God's word.
Right.
So, yes, I think you came up with 3 good ones.
Yes. Well, and self-reflection's like this kind of like ethereal thing, but I mean, it really comes down to being willing to recognize and admit your faults and flaws and assumptions and biases, and like it, and God will reveal those, as you're pursuing God, as you're pursuing humility, as you're pursuing your wife, as you take time to, I think for me, it's been, reading books or listening to audiobooks, like things will get you out of your comfort zone and help you consider things that maybe you hadn't before, because it's really easy to just kind of get hyper-focused in your life, whether that's work or kids or whatever, and it just, there's a lot of activity, but you're not really going deep on anything,
Yeah, I think the self-awareness and the reflection piece, personal reflection, I think that's where a husband's going to spend, 75% of their time growing in, because so it's great to have community around you, and it's great to kind of lay out some ground rules for your wife on how to engage in relationship, but you really can't, in arguing, but you really can't do any of that unless self-awareness and personal reflection is done.
Sure, unless you actually recognize your need for it.
Yeah. So, it's. I'm going to come up with a really bad illustration here, probably.
Excellent. Well, I love bad illustrations, so it's the only kind I come up with. So.
That's it's. Have you ever played the game Life? The game of Life?
Oh yeah.
I really hate that game. Like,
you love to hate it, or you just hate it?
I just hate it. No, I hate it. Like, it used to be Monopoly that I hate, but but I really hate the game of Life because it's so. There's so much stuff there that I hate, think your dog wants in.
Yep. That's a new sound for our podcast listeners. We got a puppy last week, so
I like this puppy, by the way.
he's good.
Scout.
We'll have to do a picture for the thumbnail.
What a good name for a dog too, by the way.
He's cute.
So the game of life sucks.
Yep.
You know, like it's almost worse.
Like figuratively or like the actual board game?
Like actual board game sucks.
Okay.
Like I've tried to play it with kids, and it's so like there's so many rules to it that it's almost impossible to sit down, open up, and play. Say like Chutes and Ladders. You know, like you got to have the rules.
Yeah.
You have to have the rules, and so I guess my bad illustration here is if you don't engage in self-awareness and self-reflection, personal reflection, as it pertains to your marriage and arguing and fighting well with your wife, it's like playing the game of life without actually reading any of the instructions. Like you're going to get into it, and like 5 minutes in, you're like, screw this.
Yeah, you're like, this is stupid. I'm done.
You hit the board, tear it up, and I'm out.
All right, I just flipped the table.
Yeah.
So's the dog, apparently.
I like this commentary from the dog.
I know.
You know, mostly because like we're not here in the airplanes, we got the dog in the
Right, I get
background.
the dog instead. Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
This is pretty cool.
He's more entertaining.
I don't know. That was probably a poor illustration, but
It was terrible, but we're going to leave it in there.
I liked it.
I think our listeners need to suffer a little too. They can't all be home runs. Podcast episodes.
No, they can't be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we're covering some good stuff. So like any podcast, we're hitting stuff on a 30,000 foot level. But what are you taking away from this?
What am I taking away? Let's see.
Starting to rain.
I mean, it's starting to sprinkle a little. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, when it comes down to being able to, I guess, glorify God and be productive in your marriage when it comes to conflict, because you're going to have it. I think it requires being grounded in God, in His Word. You know, if you're not in God's Word every day, you're not praying, you're gonna drift, even if you're a moral person or whatever.
Very true.
And then just always thinking about like what's helpful to your spouse. You know, the thing I might have touched on this before. One of the best pieces of advice I received before I got married in marriage counseling was if you are trying to outserve your wife and she's trying to outserve you, you're not going to have a lot of issues because you're both thinking service, not being served. And usually when things go sideways, it's because I don't feel like I'm getting what I am supposed to be getting from my wife, as opposed to, you know, I'm never getting upset about like I'm just not giving enough to my wife, like, you know. So, you know, because when you think about marriage, it's not just like we need to have God in our marriage. Like marriage is a gift from God to mirror the relationship between us and God.
Yeah.
It's not just some random thing. Like it is inherently spiritual and tied to God and our relationship with God.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to think about in those terms, and you know, not just like how can I be served, how can I feel significant, or you know, whatever it is your main thing that you feel like you're trying to get from your spouse. And if you're giving that, I think the natural thing is going to be getting that. I mean, I don't know too many Christians who, you know, when one of them humbles themselves and apologizes and their heart is softened towards the other, that's going to continue attacking and trying to hurt them. Usually it's that's the first step towards a reconciliation, a forgiveness, I'm sorry for this, I shouldn't have, you know. Yeah.
Well, I think ending on a serving note is a good note. If our listeners walk away with anything, that's a good one. So I would say dads, you know, listening, even wives that are listening.
Moms, in my case, my mom's
because I do know a
listening,
couple moms that do listen to this podcast. Is, you know, seek to outserve your spouse. That's not meant to be formulaic. That's just meant to be like, let's serve our spouses.
Yeah, it's the bigger
way,
mentality.
Yeah, the way that Christ came and served us. And if you're unfamiliar with how Christ served us, go read the 4 Gospels. And I think that's a great example and foundation that we should be learning from. Reconcile in the open. Let your kids be able to see that. I think that's good, and you're setting them up to understand the Gospels better. And when we as husbands make a vow to love and serve and protect our wives, that also means from us, because we're not perfect, and you could argue that we have the highest capability as husbands to hurt our wives, and so we want to make sure that we are acting in humility so that we can protect our wives, and that means being at the foot of the cross daily. So, with that said, dads, husbands, moms, wives, mothers, we love you all. And we'd be happy to answer any questions from our wide variety of knowledge that we have.
Yes,
And
well, I'd also be interested to hear, in the comments on whatever socials you find us on, what you do that's helpful when you have conflict with your spouse or kids.
yeah, absolutely. We'd love that because, there's a wide swath of experience out there. And so we'd love to hear. Hit us up on Facebook, Instagram. Thank you for all those who do communicate with us on Instagram. It's very encouraging and helpful for us to continue forward, not just end this thing. We love doing it, and we're going to keep doing it until rapture, I guess. I don't know.
Until you move away.
Even then, we'll still do it.
No, yeah, it's true. We can still do it. We got the technologies.
Yeah, or I'll just commute back because it's only 2.5 hours
That's true.
away.
You're commuting the other way.
Yeah, not a big deal.
Yep.
It's still going to happen.
Yep.
So we love you. Please hit us up. We continue to pray for you guys and pray for us because we're not perfect and we need prayer.
We need prayer.
So until then, gents and ladies, enjoy your whiskey.